And you've got ComScore and Nielsen trying to figure that out, and who do you think is going to win?
Well, I would bet on both of them, which is not just being, politic. I think you've got two very important companies, very good companies, very fiercely competitive companies, but run by some very, very smart and adept people. I mean, we've had our issues with ComScore and Nielsen and other measurement companies in the past. The big issue has been, I think, that there's a tendency, historically, predates digital, the measurement companies either to not innovate with the times, to not keep up, or to introduce disruptive innovations into the marketplace without enough time and socialization and back and forth input from the from the marketplace itself, especially from the publishers that we represent.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the basis of the 3MS initiative, the Making Measurement Make Sense initiative,
Yep.
Was to bring the major elements of the value chain together. The marketers who are spending the money
right.
to market and advertise their products, the publishers at the other end who are assembling the audiences and running the ads and displaying the marketing campaigns, the conduits of the marketing campaigns, and the agencies in the middle that are really kind of translating client needs, marketer needs to the publishers, helping to traffic the solutions, helping to create the strategies and the executions. We wanted to bring them together, in a room and address the question, okay, how do we make this value chain and the supply chain work effectively for us, and then we can go out to the measurement companies, and we're going to get a lot of input from them during the process, but then we want to go out to the measurement companies and say, here is what the principals in the transaction need that we want you to build to. And that's been a very, I think, exciting and beneficial part of the 3MS initiative, that for the first time we brought all the major parties together to change the way measurement works inside the digital advertising
right.
supply chain, and we're getting the vendors to build to suit.
Right, and this feels like the bridge that sort of translates some of this currency that we're putting in place for brands coming online to the more traditional mediums.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, one of the most important parts of it that not everybody has noticed is that there's also a change in the governance of media measurement standardization that's taking place as part of this. One of the recommendations that Bain came back with is that the industry really needs a neutral central body to act as the convening force and kind of supervisory power to help set measurement standards on an ongoing basis as the technologies continue to evolve. And as Bain said, that body already exists. It's the MRC, the Media Rating Council. Right. But what we need to do is take the Media Rating Council and help them transition from being just an auditor of standards that other entities develop to being the developer of standards itself. And so from an IAB standpoint, we actually took a very, very dramatic step here. We gave up power. Not everybody has kind of seen that, because if you go back to 13, 15 years ago, to the beginning of Operative, to the beginnings of the IAB, IAB ended up by default being the standardization body for our industry. Why? Because no one else was doing it.
Right.
That's why we were created, to create ad format standards, to create measurement standards. But we would then always go hat in hand, after we'd done all that lifting, go hat in hand to the agencies and to the marketers and say, look, we've done the work, will you accept this? And lots of times they said yes and did it. Lots of times they said yes and ignored it. Sometimes they said no. We needed to bring them into the creation process. We need to make them full partners in this. And so we gave up this, a lot of this authority at IAB and said, no, we want the MRC. We want a neutral, tripartite body to be the one that spearheads the development of standards from now on.
And it became pretty popular, right? A lot of publishers went out and got those audits.
Well, yeah. I mean, in the beginning, sort of going back, the industry really rose on the basis of MRC audits. That became a real credential in the industry. They've grown in importance over the years as the technology has become more diverse and more complex. But now we're saying we want the MRC not just to oversee audits, but to oversee the development of the standards themselves. That's really, really important to have that kind of neutral, party there. So we have the marketers and the agencies and the publishers and the measurement companies and the ad technology companies all working together up front to develop the best possible supply chain. And for us to stop putting this together and re-putting it together with chicken wire and spit.
Right, right.
Which is, kind of one of the reasons that you guys exist. It's to, help us, create in a real-time basis a high-functioning, efficient supply chain.
Yeah, and as you know, we sit on several committees at the IAB and try to help you drive those standards, and a lot of the stuff that comes out of those sessions is stuff that winds up inside of our technology, right? Like viewable impressions.
Yeah.
We have, even before we created functionality for viewable impressions, we had some very clever customers that started tricking our system a little bit to make the conversion from an actual impression to a viewable impression at the time of their proposals. So when their brands called them up, as opposed to a direct marketer, and said, I don't care so much about how many impressions you have, I want to know what's above the fold. And right then and there, they were able to say, okay, I could do that conversion for you, here's the answer.
So what do you think, what's your projection? How long do you think it'll take for viewability to become the central established currency? What do you think our migration path is going to be?
I think a lot of that will be driven about, around the dollars that are flowing in from the top. And there's some really interesting dynamics that I think are going to push that along a lot quicker. And some of the things that we see is, companies that have sold television, companies like Dish TV, for example, that have already converted their TV ad business to an impression-based model. I mean, that's a really interesting development, because you go from selling something on ratings points all of a sudden to something by impression. Well, then all of a sudden that becomes a currency that needs to be measured in some way, right? The other thing that's really interesting is companies like Time Warner, like Comcast, like Cablevision, and a lot of the programming companies have this idea of video on demand. And that's going to become this pretty cool bridge that gets a lot of those TV dollars to become digital dollars. And if you don't want to look at it that way, well, you can look at it as those TV dollars that are sold by ratings turning into impression dollars, right? And they're not monetizing video on demand today, but they're talking about it, right?
Yeah, you got to believe that all this money that, say, Netflix is pouring into original series, like, I mean, the ads are everywhere right now for Netflix House of Cards and Arrested Development. And you got to look at that as the beginning of an extraordinarily, at least I do, as an extraordinarily big wave of activity, where all of a sudden the barriers between digitally delivered video, like internet video, the barrier between that and normal television, all of a sudden broken down.
Sure.
So now Netflix not an ad-supported service; it's it's fee for service.
Right.
But boy, it's a short step from putting up an entire new season of House of Cards and reviving Arrested Development as a video on demand product.
Sure.
Towards doing them as ad-supported products. I mean, you can. Where IAB has taken over the stewardship of the digital content new fronts for this coming year. I mean, you've got companies like Hulu and YouTube and Microsoft and AOL and Yahoo and Blip and Crackle. I mean, Sony Crackle is doing this original series again with Jerry Seinfeld.
Right.
I mean, all of a sudden, it's kind of, wait a minute, we've got all these big, star-studded video products coming into your big home screen, my 46-inch Samsung, or my tablet, or my smartphone, depending upon where I want it. That's just a different, we've just invented a different medium.
Yeah, it's all blending together.
Yeah.
And I think the currency that holds them together becomes the impression, the idea of this viewable impression.
Yeah.
Sort of this common currency that will allow brands to better understand what they're buying.